Chapter 1. The Awakening of Awareness. Every disaster, every violent encounter, and every life-altering emergency exists on a timeline. If you stretch that timeline out in your mind, you will find a single, defining moment resting dead in the center. It is the moment the glass shatters in a collision. It is the sudden, deafening shout in a quiet room. It is the exact second a hidden threat becomes a violent reality. We call that singular moment the bang. Everything that happens after that moment is right of bang. When you live your life right of bang, you are entirely reactive. You are playing a desperate game of catch-up against a reality that has already shifted against you, forcing you to navigate chaos without a plan. Modern society practically trains us to live in this space. We learn first aid for the moments after an injury occurs. We purchase insurance for the days following a devastating fire. We are taught defensive maneuvers to deploy only after an attacker has already closed the distance and struck. But the universal truth of any conflict is that whoever acts first dictates the terms of the encounter. If you are reacting, you have already surrendered the initiative. You have handed the reins of your survival over to chance, or worse, to someone who wishes to do you harm. Now, look in the opposite direction. Before the glass shatters, before the shout echoes, and before the attack is launched, there is a quiet, profound space in time. This is left of bang. It is the domain of preparation, observation, and intuition. To live left of bang means recognizing the subtle ripples in the water long before the predator surfaces. It means reading your environment with such piercing clarity that you are simply no longer there when the bad thing happens. It is not a mystical power or an inherited gift. It is a deliberate, cultivated mindset that transforms you from a passive participant in your environment into an active, empowered protector. To understand how to exist in this proactive space, you must first understand how human awareness functions. Awareness is not a simple light switch that is either on or off. It operates on a sliding spectrum, categorized by a series of color codes that dictate your psychological and physiological readiness. Imagine a father standing in the middle of a sprawling, chaotic winter festival. The air is freezing, filled with the smell of roasted nuts and the blare of overlapping carnival music. Thousands of people are pressing shoulder to shoulder, moving in unpredictable currents. The father is exhausted, thinking only about getting his children home, staring down at the glowing screen of a smartphone to check the time or respond to a trivial message. He is oblivious to the shifting moods of the crowd, the proximity of strangers, and the physical layout of his surroundings. This is condition white. It is a state of complete and utter unawareness. In condition white, the mind is turned inward, entirely disconnected from the physical environment. If a panic were to break out, if a crowd surge happened, or if a genuine, immediate threat emerged from the sea of coats and scarves, this father would be the absolute last to know. He would be caught squarely right of bang, forced to navigate terror with a sluggish, unprepared mind. His body would take precious, life-saving seconds just to process that reality had changed. Condition white is the zone of the prey. To shift from prey to protector, you must elevate your baseline of existence to condition yellow. Condition yellow is a state of relaxed alertness. It is not paranoia. It is not living in constant, exhausting fear of the unknown. Think of it as simply leaving the porch light on in your mind. You are taking in the world around you, acknowledging the normal rhythm of human behavior, and quietly scanning for anything that breaks that rhythm. In Condition Yellow, that same father at the winter festival is no longer staring blindly at a screen. His head is up. He feels the temperature of the air and the energy of the crowd. He instinctively notes where the exits are and which pathways are choked with bodies. He casually observes the flow of the people, noticing the happy families, the impatient teenagers, and the exhausted vendors. Because his mind is engaged outward, he is perfectly positioned to notice when the environment shifts. When that shift occurs, when a group of individuals suddenly begins moving violently against the flow of traffic, pushing aggressively, their faces tight with hidden adrenaline and their hands concealed, the father transitions effortlessly into Condition Orange. Condition Orange is a state of focused awareness. The general, relaxed scan of the environment zeroes in on a specific potential threat. His heart rate elevates slightly, pumping oxygen to his muscles. His mind, already awake, begins to formulate a rapid, tactical plan. He decides that if those individuals come within 20 feet, he will pull his children behind a heavy vendor stall and exit through the south alleyway. There is no panic in Condition Orange, only quiet, deliberate preparation. And if that threat materializes into actual danger, if a weapon is drawn or violence erupts, the shift into Condition Red is instantaneous. Condition Red is the lethal mode, the execution of the plan forged in Condition Orange. There is no freezing, there is no crippling denial, there is only decisive, practiced action to protect life. The father moves his children to safety because he recognized the threat while it was still forming in the shadows. He stayed left of Bang. But consider the tragic alternative. What happens when someone refuses to engage with their environment? What happens when a person lingering stubbornly in Condition White is violently and suddenly forced into Condition Red without any warning? The result is Condition Black. The heart rate explodes to a counterproductive rhythm, hammering so fast that the body can no longer function properly. The brain is flooded with a toxic cocktail of stress hormones. Cognitive processing shuts down completely. Peripheral vision collapses into a dark tunnel. The person freezes in place, unable to formulate a coherent thought, let alone a plan of survival. Condition Black is the devastating consequence of failing to acknowledge that the world can turn dangerous in a heartbeat. We are rarely taught how to read the world proactively. We are frequently told to trust our guts, to listen to our intuition, but we are almost never given the actual vocabulary to understand what our guts are desperately trying to tell us. Intuition is not magic. It is simply your subconscious mind processing danger faster than your conscious brain can articulate it. Your brain recognizes a pattern that does not fit, an anomaly in the rhythm of life, and it sends a physical warning to your body. The journey to mastering your environment begins with this fundamental shift in perspective. You must refuse to be a victim of circumstance. You must choose to step out of the reactive, sluggish shadows and walk deliberately into the space where you control the timeline. You must choose to live left of the event. To do that, you have to learn to read the environment like a seasoned hunter reads the forest floor. You have to understand the silent, ancient language that every human being on this planet speaks without realizing it. A language of instinct, survival, and subtle physical tells. Chapter 2. The Hunter's Intuition. We have all walked into a room, an empty parking garage, or a crowded social gathering and felt a sudden, inexplicable chill. Your stomach tightens, the hairs on the back of your neck stand up, and a quiet internal alarm bell begins to ring. Most people dismiss this sensation. They rationalize it away. They tell themselves they are just being paranoid, tired, or letting their imagination run wild. But what if that feeling is not paranoia? What if it is a highly evolved survival mechanism desperately trying to save your life? Intuition is widely misunderstood in modern society. It is often portrayed as a mystical sixth sense, a gut feeling born of magic, or a supernatural gift bestowed upon a lucky few. In reality, intuition is a fiercely logical and scientifically grounded process. It is your brain's ability to recognize patterns and access a lifetime of stored experiences in a fraction of a second. Imagine your mind as a vast, endlessly expanding filing cabinet. Every time you encounter a situation, your brain creates a file. People who have spent their lives operating in high-stakes, unpredictable environments, veteran street cops, seasoned paramedics, or individuals who grew up in exceptionally dangerous neighborhoods, have incredibly thick file folders. Consider a seasoned paramedic pulling up to the scene of a multi-vehicle collision at a busy intersection. The environment is a nightmare of twisted metal, shattered glass, screaming bystanders, and chaotic noise. A rookie arriving at that same scene might be entirely overwhelmed by the sheer volume of sensory data, paralyzed by the stress of trying to deliberately analyze who needs help first. But the veteran paramedic steps out of the ambulance and immediately sprints toward a quiet, motionless figure slumped against a deployed airbag, completely bypassing two other victims who are crying out loudly in pain. She did not stop to conduct a slow, conscious, analytical assessment of the entire intersection. Her brain simply recognized a pattern. Loud victims are breathing. Silent victims are dying. Her thick file folders allowed her subconscious mind to make a life-saving decision in the blink of an eye. But this presents a critical problem for the rest of us. What if you do not have 20 years of experience surviving chaos? What if your internal file folders are thin? You cannot simply wait for a lifetime of dangerous close calls to develop your intuition. You have to actively re-engineer your mental toolkit. You have to learn how to consciously observe the physical and human terrain around you, rapidly accelerating the growth of your internal filing system. This requires a dedicated approach to understanding your environment, honing your visual observation to see things clearly, reading the physical disturbances left behind in your surroundings, and, most importantly, learning to read the people occupying that space. When we talk about reading people and identifying threats, we must confront a dangerous misconception head-on. The concept of profiling carries heavy, often negative cultural baggage. Many people immediately equate it with prejudice, assuming it means judging someone based solely on their race, ethnicity, religion, or gender. Let me be absolutely clear. Relying on superficial demographic stereotypes is not just morally wrong, it is tactically disastrous. It is the laziest possible form of observation, and it plays right into the hands of those who wish to do harm. Predators, criminals, and violent attackers come in every conceivable shape, size, age, and demographic. If you are looking for a specific stereotype, your brain will put blinders on, and you will miss the true danger standing right in front of you. Picture a security professional tasked with guarding the entrance to a highly exclusive, crowded corporate gala. Hundreds of wealthy guests are flowing through the grand double doors. If this guard is operating on lazy stereotypes, he might fixate his attention on a young, scruffy catering assistant pushing a cart toward the service elevator. The guard watches the young man like a hawk, entirely consumed by a preconceived bias about how someone who belongs there should look. Meanwhile, slipping right past the guard's field of vision is a well-dressed, middle-aged man in a tailored tuxedo. But this man in the tuxedo is sweating profusely despite the cool air conditioning. His eyes are darting frantically toward the exits. He is repeatedly, almost obsessively, patting a heavy, unnatural bulge near the waistband of his trousers. The guard misses every single one of these glaring behavioral red flags because his attention is hijacked by a meaningless demographic bias. True, proactive observation focuses entirely on behavior. It is about understanding the universal biological responses that human beings exhibit when they are under severe stress, harboring bad intentions, or carrying a concealed threat. It requires rapidly developing your situational awareness, separating the vital, life-saving signals from the meaningless background noise, and applying critical thinking in real time. In the real world, you will never have the luxury of perfect information. The environments we move through are messy, chaotic, and inherently ambiguous. If you wait until you are absolutely 100% certain that a threat exists before you take action, you will inevitably find yourself reacting to the bang. You must learn to use mental shortcuts, heuristics, that allow you to make highly accurate snap decisions based on just a few critical pieces of information. You do not need to know a stranger's life story to know they intend to harm you. You only need to recognize that their physical behavior violently contradicts the normal, peaceful rhythm of the environment around them. Developing this hunter's intuition is entirely possible for anyone willing to put in the effort. It is about shifting away from a defensive, reactive posture and embracing a proactive, empowered state of awareness. But to do this effectively, we have to overcome one of the greatest obstacles the modern human mind faces. We have to stop overanalyzing every single detail and learn to trust the critical slices of information our brains are desperately trying to process. We must first learn how to escape the trap of our own overthinking. Chapter 3. The Trap of Overthinking. Imagine you are standing on a crowded subway platform during the evening rush hour. The air is thick, stale, and echoing with the metallic screech of arriving trains. Hundreds of exhausted commuters are shoulder to shoulder, staring blankly at their phones or the dirty tiled walls. Out of this sea of humanity, one individual catches your eye. He is pacing erratically near the edge of the platform, wearing a heavy winter coat despite the stifling summer heat, and clutching a bulky, unmarked duffel bag close to his chest. He mutters to himself, his eyes darting wildly, tracking the security cameras overhead. Instantly, your mind begins to race, desperately trying to make sense of the scene. You ask yourself a dozen questions in the span of 3 seconds. Is he just eccentric, or is he dangerous? Is he suffering from a mental health crisis and in need of medical attention, or is he harboring a violent intent? If you alert a police officer, will you be wasting their time or falsely accusing an innocent person? If you run, will you cause a panic? If you do nothing, Are you putting your own life at risk? You begin to weigh the pros and cons of each action, evaluating the social consequences, the legal ramifications, and the physical risks. As you stand there, frozen in deliberation, the man suddenly drops the bag and sprints toward the stairs. If that bag contained a threat, your window to act has already closed. You were caught in the most common and devastating trap of the human mind under pressure: paralysis by analysis. From the time we are children, society teaches us a very specific, highly deliberate method for making decisions. We are trained to gather all available facts, weigh the costs against the benefits, consider multiple alternative options, and carefully anticipate the long-term consequences of our actions. We learn to draw up lists of pros and cons. This analytical approach is wonderfully effective when you are deciding which house to buy, plotting a corporate merger, or choosing a university. In those situations, you have the luxury of time, a relatively clear set of criteria, and the ability to gather a wealth of data. But in a dynamic, high-stakes, time-compressed environment, analytical decision-making is not just ineffective, it is actively dangerous. When you are faced with a rapidly evolving threat, your brain is suddenly bombarded by an overwhelming tidal wave of sensory data. You are operating in a three-dimensional, 360-degree world where danger could emerge from any direction. Every sudden movement, every discarded piece of trash, every speeding vehicle, and every stranger's face floods your visual and auditory channels. This is information overload. When you attempt to apply slow, deliberate, analytical reasoning to this chaotic flood of information, your cognitive processor simply crashes. You cannot possibly evaluate every single variable because there is simply too much noise and not nearly enough time. And so, the mind freezes. You become trapped in a loop of endless evaluation, waiting for just one more piece of clarifying information before you commit to an action. You hesitate, and in the space of that hesitation, the initiative shifts entirely to the predator. This hesitation is deeply rooted in our desperate, entirely human craving for the perfect decision. We put an immense, crushing burden on ourselves to be absolutely right. We fear the embarrassment of overreacting. We fear the professional or social consequences of making a mistake. We want a guarantee that our chosen course of action will resolve the situation flawlessly. But you must accept a hard, uncomfortable truth in the chaos of a real-world crisis. The perfect decision does not exist. You will never have perfect information. You will never have a crystal clear understanding of a stranger's hidden intentions until they act upon them, and by then, it is entirely too late. If you wait for absolute certainty, you are waiting for the bang. Those who survive and protect others in the world's most unforgiving environments do not seek perfection. They seek the good enough solution. A good enough decision executed immediately and with absolute conviction is infinitely superior to a perfect decision made 5 minutes after the crisis has ended. To operate left of the event, you must grant yourself the permission to act on partial information. You must realize that when a situation is rapidly deteriorating, ignoring the irrelevant background noise and focusing on just a few critical, reliable indicators is your best chance of survival. You do not need to solve the entire puzzle to know the picture is dangerous. You only need to recognize that the pieces do not fit the normal, peaceful baseline of your environment. Breaking free from paralysis by analysis requires a fundamental rewiring of how you trust yourself. It means letting go of the endless pros and cons list and tapping into a faster, far more ancient system of evaluation. It means understanding that nature has already equipped you with a biological alarm system designed specifically to bypass the sluggish, overthinking portions of your brain. To truly master your environment and make lightning-fast, life-saving decisions, we must explore the raw, evolutionary biology of survival and learn how to harness the incredible power of the human body's deepest instincts. Chapter 4. The Biology of Survival. To escape the paralyzing trap of overthinking, we must turn to a system of survival that was perfected millions of years before the modern world even existed. Long before humans worried about social embarrassment, legal liabilities, or the complexities of modern rules of engagement, our ancestors were both the hunters and the hunted. They survived in unforgiving, predator-filled environments not by drawing up lists of pros and cons, but by relying on a deeply ingrained, lightning-fast biological alarm system. That ancient alarm system still lives inside you today, operating quietly beneath the surface of your conscious thoughts, constantly scanning the world to keep you alive. Understanding this system requires looking at how the human brain is structured. The front part of your brain, the frontal cortex, is the modern marvel that handles logic, reason, language, and complex analysis. It is the part of you that is reading or listening right now, thinking about tomorrow's schedule or evaluating a new concept. But tucked beneath that sophisticated machinery is the middle brain, known as the limbic system. The limbic system is raw, ancient, and entirely focused on one single objective: your immediate survival. It processes sensory information effortlessly and instantaneously, bypassing your conscious awareness to categorize everything in your environment as either a threat or a non-threat. When it detects a threat, it does not ask for permission. It hijacks your body and forces a physical reaction. These involuntary reactions fall into three universal categories: the freeze, the flight, and the fight responses. Imagine a young woman walking to her car in a sprawling, dimly lit parking structure after a grueling evening shift. The concrete echoes with the distant hum of traffic, but her immediate surroundings seem entirely deserted. Suddenly, her limbic system registers the faint, unnatural scuff of a heavy shoe against the pavement just a few yards behind a concrete pillar. Before her conscious brain can even form the word danger, her body executes a hardwired survival script. She stops dead in her tracks, her breathing becoming incredibly shallow and quiet to avoid detection. This is the freeze response, the ancient instinct to blend into the background, evade a predator's gaze, and buy the brain precious milliseconds to evaluate the threat. As the shadow behind the pillar shifts, her body seamlessly transitions into the flight response. Her heart rate spikes, pumping adrenaline and oxygen to her major muscle groups. Without making a conscious choice, she physically angles her torso away from the pillar, her eyes locking onto the illuminated exit sign at the far end of the structure. Her limbic system is creating distance, prioritizing a rapid escape from the threat area. If the figure were to step out and block her path, cornering her, the limbic system would instantly flood her system with the primal, aggressive energy required for the fight response, preparing her to physically, violently defend her life. She does not need a spreadsheet to analyze this moment. She relies on a powerful heuristic, a rapid mental shortcut that uses just a fraction of crucial information to trigger a life-saving bias for action. Because she trusted that biological alarm, she alters her route, swiftly moves toward the safety of a security booth, and ensures the violent encounter never happens at all. To harness this biology intentionally, we have to train our conscious minds to actively observe the patterns that trigger the limbic system. Life functions smoothly because human behavior generally follows highly predictable patterns. We are creatures of habit. Every environment, every culture, and every individual has a baseline of normal behavior. A baseline is simply the expected rhythm of a specific place at a specific time. To become a proactive protector, you must constantly establish the baseline of your surroundings and then hunt for the anomalies. An anomaly is any behavior or presence that wildly deviates from that established normal. It is something happening that should not be happening, or something missing that should absolutely be there. Consider a veteran bartender managing a crowded, high-energy tavern on a Friday night. The baseline of this environment is chaotic but entirely consistent. The air is filled with loud laughter, the clinking of heavy glasses, the thumping of a jukebox, and people leaning casually over the sticky mahogany bar. The bartender's mind has absorbed this baseline completely. Suddenly, at the far corner of the room, two patrons stand up. The bartender does not hear what they say to each other, but his eyes immediately lock onto them. Why? Because amidst the sea of fluid, relaxed movement and loud noise, these two men have gone entirely silent and perfectly rigid. The sudden absence of noise from their corner is an anomaly falling violently below the baseline. Their stiff, tense posture is an anomaly rising sharply above it. The bartender's brain recognizes the subconscious freeze and fight responses triggering in those patrons. Acting on this thin slice of behavioral information, the bartender signals the bouncer. The two men are escorted out into the cool night air before a single punch is ever thrown. The bartender stayed left of bang by reading the anomalies. This methodology is not limited to a specific city, country, or culture. It works everywhere because it is built entirely on human universals. Despite the beautiful diversity of global cultures underneath our clothes and customs, we all share the same exact biological hardware. We all instinctively move toward things that make us feel comfortable and physically pull away from things that cause us fear. We are all fundamentally lazy, biologically wired to take the path of least resistance to conserve energy. Most importantly, human beings are incredibly clumsy liars when placed under heavy cognitive load. Because the human brain is practically incapable of true multitasking, attempting to act natural while secretly planning a malicious act divides a predator's attention. The immense mental effort required to scan for security, stalk a target, and conceal violent intentions inevitably leaks out through jagged, unnatural physical movements. Their limbic system betrays their conscious deception. We now understand the biological engine that drives human survival and the conceptual framework of baselines and anomalies. The next step is to translate that theory into a tangible, observable vocabulary. We must learn to consciously read the physical tells that the limbic system creates, reading the silent physical language of the human body to uncover exactly what a person is feeling, hiding, and preparing to do.
Chapter 5. The Silent Language, Kinesics and Biometrics. Think about the last time you sat in a bustling public space, perhaps a crowded cafe or an airport terminal, and simply watched the people moving around you. Without hearing a single word of their conversations, you likely knew exactly who was exhausted, who was furiously angry, who was deeply in love, and who was lost. You were reading a language that is broadcast continuously across every culture and continent, entirely without sound. To master your environment and proactively identify hidden threats, you must learn to read this silent language with absolute precision. Because the modern world bombards us with a chaotic hurricane of sensory information, we must filter this noise by breaking human behavior down into specific, manageable categories, which we call domains. The first two of these domains, kinesics and biometrics, teach us how to read the physical human body from the outside in. Kinesics is the study of conscious and subconscious body language, encompassing the movements of the limbs, head, and torso. When you are attempting to identify a predator or a concealed threat, kinesics is your first and most reliable diagnostic tool. However, you must never fall into the trap of analyzing a single, isolated gesture. If you observe a man standing on a street corner with his arms tightly crossed, you might assume he is defensive or concealing a weapon, but the reality might simply be that the wind is blowing and he forgot his jacket. To eliminate this ambiguity, you must always look for clusters of behavior. A cluster is a group of 3 or more reinforcing gestures that all point to the exact same emotional state. By demanding 3 indicators before passing judgment, you strip away guesswork and ground your intuition in observable science. These behavioral clusters are direct physical manifestations of the limbic system's fight or flight responses, universally categorized into specific emotional states. When a person is operating from a primal fight response, they will display the dominant cluster. Dominance is deeply territorial. It is the subconscious attempt to make the physical body appear larger and more intimidating. You will see individuals stand with their legs splayed wide to claim ground, thrust their chests outward, and plant their hands firmly on their hips to expand their physical footprint. Conversely, when a person feels the need to yield or avoid conflict, the absence of that fight response manifests as the submissive cluster. A submissive individual will physically shrink themselves, bringing their arms tightly into their torso, lowering their shoulders to protect their neck, and tucking their feet closely beneath their chair. When a person feels a genuine threat but cannot physically run away, their flight response triggers the uncomfortable cluster. This is incredibly important for identifying bad actors because criminals and predators are almost always operating under intense internal stress. A deeply uncomfortable person will subconsciously try to distance themselves from whatever is causing them anxiety. They will lean their torso away from you, angle their feet sharply toward the nearest exit, and instinctively place physical barriers, like crossed arms or a held bag, over their vital organs and groin. Because the limbic system is desperately trying to manage the massive surge of nervous energy generated by this discomfort, the body will inevitably leak this energy through pacifying behaviors. A pacifying behavior is any physical act used to calm the autonomic nervous system and soothe the body. Imagine a seasoned detective interviewing a suspect who appears outwardly calm but is secretly terrified of being caught. The detective watches the suspect's hands. The suspect begins to stroke the back of his neck, rub his thighs vigorously, and take long, artificially slow exhales. He is physically massaging his own nerve endings to lower his racing heart rate. Furthermore, if a person is concealing something illegal, like a stolen item or a hidden weapon, they will exhibit smuggling behavior. Despite their desperate desire to look normal, their anxiety will force them to subconsciously pat or touch the concealed object, constantly reassuring themselves that it is still safely hidden from view. Because they are dividing their mental attention between trying to act natural and hiding their malicious intent, their movements will become uncoordinated, jerky, and entirely unnatural. You can also spot a kinesic slip, a glaring moment when a person's spoken words tell a lie, but their subconscious physical gesture simultaneously tells the absolute truth. While a highly trained or sociopathic individual might eventually learn to suppress their outward body language, they cannot escape the second domain of physical observation, biometrics. Biometric cues are the completely uncontrollable, automatic biological responses triggered by the autonomic nervous system when a person experiences severe stress, fear, or anger. These are the chemical betrayals of the human body, the raw physiological shifts that occur before the conscious mind can even attempt to hide them. When a person experiences intense anger or sudden embarrassment, their capillaries wildly dilate, rushing blood to the surface and causing a deep, undeniable reddening or flushing of the face and neck. On the opposite end of the spectrum, when a person is gripped by profound fear or crippling anxiety, the body prepares for imminent physical trauma by aggressively pulling blood away from the skin and extremities, redirecting it to the major muscle groups. This rapid vasoconstriction results in a sudden, ghostly paling of the face. Simultaneously, the autonomic nervous system halts the production of saliva, leaving the mouth completely dry and forcing the individual to swallow repeatedly or constantly lick their lips in discomfort. The most profoundly honest biometric indicators are found in the eyes. A person's pupils react to emotional stimuli in a fraction of a second, entirely beyond their conscious control. When an individual encounters something deeply pleasurable, or conversely experiences a surge of raw fear, their pupils will dramatically dilate to take in more information. When they look at something they despise or experience intense anger, the pupils will sharply constrict. Furthermore, a person's blink rate serves as a flawless speedometer for their internal stress levels. While a relaxed human blinks at a steady, manageable pace, an individual attempting to mask a lie or struggling under the crushing weight of anxiety will see their blink rate skyrocket, fluttering uncontrollably as their brain desperately tries to process the cognitive overload. By layering the broad strokes of kinesic body language with the microscopic, uncontrollable tells of biometric chemistry, you gain the extraordinary ability to read the hidden emotional reality of anyone in your vicinity. You no longer see just a stranger on the street. You see a living, breathing map of intentions, fears, and internal conflicts. But human beings do not exist in a vacuum. Once you master reading the physical body, you must step back and learn to read how that body navigates the physical world, manipulating distance and space to execute its hidden desires.
Chapter 6. The Dynamics of Space. Proxemics. There is an invisible, silently shifting web of energy that connects and repels every human being on this planet. When you walk down a city street, you are not simply moving through empty air. You are navigating a deeply complex, unspoken terrain of invisible boundaries and magnetic forces. Space is never truly empty. How we use the physical space around us, a concept known as proxemics, reveals our deepest relationships, our hidden intentions, and our true emotional states. Humans, like all animals, are biologically programmed to move physically closer to the things we desire and trust, and to aggressively distance ourselves from the things we fear or despise. To the trained observer, the space between people is a loud, constantly broadcasting radio signal. To decode this signal, you must first understand the 4 universal zones of human space. These are not rigid mathematical measurements, but deeply felt psychological borders. The outermost boundary is the public and social zone. This is the expansive distance we intentionally keep between ourselves and total strangers. Why do we instinctively keep strangers at a distance? The answer is rooted in pure survival. Distance equals time, and time equals options. The further away an unknown person is, the more time your brain has to process their movements, and the more physical options you have to escape or defend yourself if they suddenly turn violent. As trust increases, the physical distance decreases, bringing us into the personal zone. This is roughly an arm's length away, the comfortable space where we interact with our friends, casual acquaintances, and trusted colleagues. But the most critical and heavily guarded territory is the intimate zone. This space is reserved strictly for those we trust with our lives, spouses, children, and our most cherished loved ones. When someone steps into your intimate zone, they are well within striking distance, completely bypassing your physical reaction time. Because this inner circle is so inherently vulnerable, a forced violation of the intimate zone triggers an immediate screaming alarm in the limbic system. Imagine you are riding an elevator in a towering office building. The car is entirely empty. On the 5th floor, the doors slide open and a complete stranger steps inside. The socially accepted script dictates that they should move to the opposite corner of the elevator, maintaining maximum public distance. But what if this stranger walks directly up to you, stopping only 6 inches away, turning to face the doors while standing practically on your toes? Without a single word being spoken, your heart rate will instantly skyrocket. Your limbic system recognizes a profound violation of your intimate zone by an unvetted predator. You will subconsciously execute a flight response, perhaps pressing your back hard against the elevator wall to reclaim a few precious inches of space, or you will cross your arms tightly over your chest, throwing up physical barriers to protect your vital organs. This incredible discomfort proves that space is a tangible, emotional currency. By observing who is allowed into someone's personal and intimate zones, you can instantly and accurately deduce the true nature of their relationship without asking a single question. But space is not static. It is defined by constant motion. We refer to this dynamic movement as proxemic pushes and proxemic pulls. A proxemic pull is a magnetic attraction. It occurs when an individual or a crowd is drawn towards something they perceive as safe, valuable, or highly interesting. Think of a crowded marketplace where a charismatic street performer suddenly begins a spectacular routine. The crowd will organically tighten, stepping closer together, pulled inward by the positive, engaging energy. Predators and bad actors understand this deeply. A criminal seeking to pick pockets or an attacker seeking to inflict mass casualties will always follow a proxemic pull, deliberately embedding themselves in the thickest part of the crowd where their unnatural behaviors can be masked by the sheer density of human bodies. A proxemic push is the exact opposite. It is a biological repulsion, a physical movement away from a perceived threat, discomfort, or aggressive energy. This is where your observation skills can truly save your life. Picture a sunny, bustling city park on a weekend afternoon. Families are lounging on the grass, teenagers are throwing frisbees, and couples are walking their dogs. The baseline is relaxed, open, and joyful. Now, imagine a man walking down the central paved path. He is not yelling, he is not brandishing a weapon, but he is carrying a dark, volatile, aggressive tension in his shoulders. His jaw is clenched, and he is muttering venomously under his breath. If you watch this scene from a high vantage point, you will witness something remarkable. The crowd will part around him like water flowing smoothly around a jagged rock. The families on the grass will subconsciously pull their children a few inches closer. The teenagers will naturally pause their game and step backward as he passes. The couples will angle their bodies away from the path. None of these people are consciously thinking about this man, nor have they deliberately analyzed him as a threat. But their limbic systems have detected his hostile energy, and they are collectively executing a massive, synchronized proxemic push to distance themselves from the danger. When you learn to see the world through the lens of proxemics, hidden threats illuminate themselves. If a neighborhood suddenly empties out when a specific vehicle drives down the street, you have just witnessed a massive proxemic push, indicating that the vehicle represents a known, profound danger to that community. If an individual is aggressively closing the distance on you, pushing rapidly through the social and personal zones without your consent, they are actively hunting, stripping away your reaction time to launch an attack. By mastering the physical language of the human body and understanding how those bodies manipulate the space between them, You have built a formidable internal radar. But human beings do not just interact with each other, they interact intimately with the physical terrain they inhabit. To complete your mastery of the environment, you must zoom your perspective out even further. You must learn to read the streets, the buildings, and the collective mood of the city itself. Chapter 7. Reading the Environment. Up to this point, we have focused our lens tightly on the individual. We have learned to read the silent language of the human body and map the invisible magnetic forces pushing and pulling people through space. But humans do not exist in a vacuum. We live, fight, and survive in the physical world. To truly master your situational awareness, you must learn to zoom your perspective out and read the environment itself. The terrain you walk on, the symbols painted on the walls, and the collective, hovering mood of a crowd all broadcast vital intelligence about the threats hiding within them. This is the macro level of survival, divided into 3 distinct lenses: geographics, iconography, and atmospherics. Geographics is the study of the relationship between people and their environment. The first, undeniable rule of geographics is the reality of the home field advantage. Human beings operate with supreme confidence, fluidity, and speed in areas they know intimately, while they move with hesitant, deliberate caution in unfamiliar territory. Predators, criminals, and attackers rarely strike in environments where they feel lost or vulnerable. They operate where they have established a deep, intuitive understanding of the physical landscape. To spot a predator in their element, you must first understand how normal people move through that same space. In any environment, from a dense urban metropolis to a quiet suburban neighborhood, humans will naturally seek the path of least resistance. We are biologically wired to conserve energy, meaning we will almost always take the simplest, safest, and most obstacle-free route to our destination. These established pathways are called natural lines of drift. Think of a beautifully manicured college campus with perfectly paved sidewalks laid out in strict right angles. If you look closely at the grassy areas between the buildings, you will almost always find a worn dirt trail cutting diagonally across the lawn. That dirt trail is a natural line of drift. It is the route human behavior naturally created, bypassing the intended design because it was faster and easier. Criminals use these exact same lines to move rapidly through a neighborhood, escaping down familiar alleyways and slipping through broken fences that outsiders do not even know exist. If you know the natural lines of drift, you know exactly where a threat will travel. Within any given geographic area, human gathering spaces are divided into 2 distinct categories: habitual areas and anchor points. A habitual area is a public space open to anyone. It is the local coffee shop, the bustling outdoor market, or the chaotic city square. People from all walks of life flow freely in and out of habitual areas without needing permission. Because these areas are crowded, they are highly attractive to bad actors who wish to blend into the noise or find targets of opportunity. But criminals do not live in habitual areas. They retreat to anchor points. An anchor point is an exclusive base of operations. It is a place where access is strictly controlled, protected, and defended by the group that claims ownership over it. An anchor point could be a gang-controlled street corner, a specific table at the back of a private club, or an illicit safe house. You can identify an anchor point not by the architecture of the building, but by the behavior of the people around it. You will notice that strangers are vetted before approaching. Lookouts may be casually watching the perimeter, and the local citizens in the neighborhood will actively execute a massive proxemic push, crossing the street to completely avoid walking too close to that specific location. Often, a criminal element will maintain a quiet buffer zone around their anchor point, a perimeter where they intentionally commit 0 crimes to avoid drawing police attention to their sanctuary. The people who control these anchor points often mark their territory using the second environmental lens, iconography. Iconography is the visual language of an environment. It includes graffiti sprayed on brick walls, symbols stitched into clothing, and the tattoos inked permanently into a person's skin. Bad actors use iconography to boast, intimidate their enemies, and broadcast their violent affiliations to the world. Imagine walking through a neighborhood in transition. At first, the graffiti you see is colorful, artistic, and entirely harmless. But as you cross an invisible geographic boundary, the visual language violently shifts. The art is replaced by jagged, single-color territorial markers claiming the street for a specific violent group.
The community's reaction to this iconography tells you everything you need to know about the balance of power. If the local citizens immediately paint over the gang graffiti, the community is actively rejecting the threat. But if the violent symbols are allowed to remain untouched, bleeding into the surrounding buildings, it means the community is either silently supporting the group or completely paralyzed by intimidation. You can read the danger level of a street just by looking at the paint on the walls. This same visual language applies directly to individuals. Tattoos and clothing choices are deeply personal forms of iconography. While the vast majority of tattoos are harmless personal expressions, within the criminal and extremist underworlds, tattoos are highly coveted badges of honor that endorse a violent lifestyle. A specific symbol tattooed on a hand or neck can instantly reveal an individual's past incarcerations, their allegiance to a violent cause, and their willingness to do harm. When you see iconography that celebrates violence, you are receiving a loud, clear warning about that person's internal beliefs and potential actions. Finally, we must read the invisible hovering energy that blankets every single location on Earth. Atmospherics. Atmospherics is the collective mood of a place. It is not a mystical aura or a supernatural vibe. It is a profound biological reality. Emotions are highly contagious. When one person in a room experiences intense fear, their body language shifts, and the limbic systems of the people around them subconsciously mimic that fear, spreading the emotion through the crowd like a virus. Picture walking into a busy, popular late-night diner. The baseline atmospheric is loud, positive, and chaotic. But tonight, as you push open the glass door, the diner is dead silent. The jukebox is playing, but nobody is speaking. The patrons are staring down at their plates, their shoulders hunched in deep, uncomfortable submission. This is a negative atmospheric shift. Something, or someone, has entered that diner and infected the entire room with fear. The collective limbic system of the crowd is screaming that a threat is present. If you walk into an environment and the atmosphere feels heavy, tense, or deeply wrong, you must absolutely trust that feeling. Your brain is simply reading the synchronized survival responses of the people around you. By layering geographics, iconography, and atmospherics, you transform the physical world into a massive, readable map of human intent. You now have the complete toolkit to observe the body, the space, and the environment. But observation alone will not save you. To truly stay left of the event, you must cross the terrifying bridge between recognizing a threat and actually doing something to stop it. Chapter 8. The Threshold of Action. You can master every single domain of human behavior. You can learn to read the microscopic dilation of a stranger's pupil, the unnatural, rigid tension of a spine, and the heavy, terrifying atmosphere of a frightened room. But if you do not have a mechanism to translate those brilliant observations into physical action, your knowledge is entirely useless. Observation without action is simply watching yourself become a victim. In the modern world, the predator does not wear a recognizable uniform, nor do they announce their malicious intentions with a warning cry. They blend seamlessly into the fabric of everyday life, cloaked in ordinary clothing, looking exactly like everyone else until the exact moment they strike. This deliberate, predatory camouflage makes the decision to act incredibly difficult, burdened heavily by the weight of doubt and social friction. How do we overcome this crippling hesitation? How do we know with absolute certainty when we have gathered enough information to justify disrupting the peace, sounding an alarm, or fighting aggressively for our lives? You must establish a rigid, non-negotiable threshold of decision. This is a psychological tripwire that, once crossed, demands immediate action without any further deliberation or debate. In the realm of proactive survival, this life-saving tripwire is known as the Rule of Three. When you observe 3 distinct behavioral anomalies, 3 things that violently contradict the peaceful baseline of your environment, you no longer have the luxury of waiting. One anomaly might simply be a quirk of human nature, a bad day, or an innocent misunderstanding. 2 anomalies might be a bizarre coincidence that warrants closer attention. But 3 anomalies form a definitive, undeniable cluster of threat behavior. Imagine you are standing in line at a crowded community bank. You notice a man walking through the front doors wearing a heavy, oversized winter coat despite the stifling midsummer heat outside.
That is one anomaly. You watch his hands and notice he is profusely sweating, repeatedly reaching down to pat a heavy concealed bulge near his waistband. That is 2. Instead of joining the line, he paces aggressively near the exit, his eyes tracking the security cameras and the armed guard with intense predatory focus. That is 3. You do not wait to see a drawn weapon. You do not wait for him to shout a demand. You have reached the threshold of decision, and you must act immediately. There are, of course, rare moments when a single indicator is overwhelmingly sufficient to trigger an immediate response. If someone draws a firearm in a crowded theater, or if a vehicle accelerates aggressively toward a pedestrian walkway, ignoring all traffic signals, you do not pause to look for 2 more supporting clues. The single action is overtly hostile and demands a split-second life-saving reaction. But for the vast majority of threats, the predator silently stalking you in a dimly lit parking lot or the deeply troubled insider planning workplace violence, the danger builds slowly through subtle, layered behavioral shifts. The rule of 3 keeps you from overreacting to harmless shadows, while ensuring you never underreact to a genuine, escalating predator. Reaching the threshold of decision is only half the battle. You must also know exactly what you are going to do when that line is crossed. You cannot invent a brilliant survival strategy in the chaotic, terrifying vacuum of a sudden crisis. Your decisions must be predetermined and loaded into your subconscious mind long before you ever need them. For professionals operating in the unforgiving chaos of combat environments, this decision matrix is brutally simple and cascades downward in severity. Kill, capture, or contact. They evaluate the most extreme violent necessity first because human beings possess a profound, deeply hardwired biological reluctance to take the life of another human being, even in self-defense. By forcing themselves to assess the need for lethal force immediately, they strip away the fatal hesitation that costs lives on the battlefield, moving down to capturing or simply questioning the individual only if the lethal threshold is clearly not met. As a civilian navigating the everyday world, your predetermined decision matrix looks vastly different, but the requirement for absolute conviction remains exactly the same. Your matrix might be to run, hide, or fight. It might be to talk, report, or physically intervene. If you are sitting in a crowded airport terminal and observe 3 glaring behavioral anomalies in a fellow passenger, your predetermined decision might be to immediately report them to security and purposefully walk in the opposite direction. If you are walking to your car at night and observe 3 anomalies in someone silently tracking your movements, your decision might be to break into a dead sprint toward a crowded, well-lit storefront without looking back. The specific action matters far less than your unwavering commitment to execute it. The greatest enemy of human survival is our own denial. It is the desperately hopeful, socially conditioned voice in your head whispering that you are probably just imagining things, that you are being rude, or that someone else will surely step up and handle the problem. The threshold of decision is designed to silence that voice permanently. When the rule of 3 is met, the internal debate is over. You do not apologize for your intuition. You do not ask the world for permission to survive. You act. Chum. Chapter 9. The Everyday Application. All the deep philosophical frameworks, the study of biological survival scripts, and the clinical breakdown of nonverbal tells can easily feel like concepts belonging strictly to a distant, high-stakes universe. It is tempting to believe that these tools are reserved only for high-risk individuals operating in extreme, unforgiving environments. But the absolute truth of human nature is that a predator is a predator regardless of the setting, and the universal laws of human behavior do not change when you return home to your quiet, familiar neighborhood. In fact, you are often in the greatest danger precisely where you feel the safest, because comfort breeds a deep, blinding complacency that easily drops your awareness down into the treacherous shadows of condition white. To transform yourself into a true master of your environment, you must learn to bring behavioral profiling directly into your everyday life. This transition does not require you to walk through the world in a state of exhausting, hypervigilant paranoia. Instead, it requires a simple, highly structured 3-step mental routine that you apply to every ordinary place you visit, from a suburban grocery store to a crowded corporate office lobby. It begins by answering one fundamental question. What is going on here? Imagine you are walking into a bustling neighborhood coffee shop on a bright Tuesday morning. Instead of marching blindly toward the counter while staring downward at a screen, your head is up. In the span of a single casual glance, You are actively answering that first question to establish an explicit baseline for that specific location. You look at the atmospherics. The general mood is relaxed, predictable, and cheerfully low stakes. People are quietly tapping on laptops, softly murmuring in casual pairs, or leaning comfortably back in padded chairs. You map the geographics. This coffee shop is a textbook habitual area where any stranger can come and go freely. You instinctively note the natural lines of drift, the clear pathway leading from the front door straight to the register, and you quickly spot the alternative exits and heavy physical structures that could provide immediate protection if the environment suddenly turned hostile. You have quietly established the normal rhythm of the room. Once the baseline is locked into your mind, you immediately transition to the second mental step. What would cause someone to stand out here and why? You are actively defining what an anomaly would look like before it ever materializes, using the other domains to sharpen your focus. In this relaxed, predictable coffee shop, you know that an anomaly would be anyone carrying a rigid, volatile fight energy or an intensely anxious flight response. Suddenly, a man walks through the front door, and your internal radar immediately flashes. He does not shout, and he does not pull out a weapon, but he wildly disrupts the baseline you just established. As you watch him, you begin to systematically build a cluster of 3 distinct anomalies. First, his geographics are entirely wrong. Instead of moving along the natural line of drift toward the counter to order, he steps sharply off the path, positioning himself in a dark corner with his back pressed hard against the wall, completely avoiding any casual interaction with the patrons. Second, his kinesics are deeply alarming. While the rest of the room is loose and relaxed, this man's posture is incredibly stiff. His jaw is tightly clenched, and he is exhibiting intense smuggling behavior. His right hand is hidden inside his jacket pocket, repeatedly and obsessively patting an unnatural, heavy object concealed against his ribs. Third, your eyes shift to his biometrics. His face is noticeably paling, his breathing is shallow and rapid, and his blink rate is fluttering uncontrollably under the crushing weight of a massive internal adrenaline surge. Your mind, trained to bypass overthinking, instantly snaps into the third and final step of the routine. What am I going to do about it? Because you have hit the critical threshold of the rule of 3, the time for passive observation is officially over. You do not freeze and you do not hesitate. You seamlessly execute your predetermined civilian decision matrix. You quietly pick up your personal belongings, calmly step away from your table, and exit through the side door into the bright morning air, completely removing yourself from the threat area long before the crisis can erupt. You stayed left of the event simply by forcing yourself to actively read the human terrain. This 3-step routine is a mental muscle that must be explicitly exercised every single day until it becomes an automated, implicit part of who you are. You can practice this skill in completely safe, low-stakes environments during your normal routine. When you sit in a shopping mall, stand in line at a bank, or wait at a busy airport gate, force yourself to write down or mentally catalog the baseline, identify the anchor points, trace the natural lines of drift, and look for the subtle physical tells of the strangers around you. The more you practice establishing baselines at home, the larger your internal filing cabinet becomes, and the faster your intuition will recognize danger when the environment turns truly hostile. Bringing profiling into your daily life completely changes how you interact with the world. You are no longer a helpless leaf blown about by the chaotic winds of circumstance. You walk with a quiet, grounded confidence because you understand the underlying rules that govern human behavior. But to truly complete your education as a protector, you must look beyond the isolated stranger on the street. You must learn to read the complex hierarchy of human groups, mastering the tools to spot the hidden shot callers, neutralize insider threats, and commit yourself to a lifetime of proactive awareness. Chapter 10. Protecting the Inner Circle. You have spent this journey learning how to scan the horizon, read the stranger on the street, and decode the silent language of the physical environment. You have built a formidable radar designed to keep the unknown predators at bay. But the final, and perhaps most difficult evolution of a protector, is learning to read the people operating directly inside your sphere. Human beings are intensely social creatures, and we rarely operate in total isolation. To truly master your situational awareness, you must understand the complex dynamics of how groups function, how to identify the true power within those groups, and how to confront the terrifying reality that sometimes the greatest threat is already standing inside your gates. Whenever you observe a group of people, whether it is a highly charged corporate boardroom or a chaotic street corner gathering, you are watching a living, breathing hierarchy. In any collective, there is always a leader. However, the true shot caller is rarely the person making the most noise or puffing out their chest in an overt display of dominance. True power is quiet, secure, and often completely insulated by the group itself. To identify this hidden authority from a distance, you must look for 4 universal behavioral indicators that the group subconsciously broadcasts. First, look for the entourage. A true leader is never truly alone. They are surrounded by individuals who provide them with a distinct benefit, whether that is physical protection, specialized advice, or social status. Second, look for subtle direction. While a junior manager or an insecure street boss might explicitly point fingers and bark loud, aggressive orders, a seasoned leader directs their people with microscopic, almost imperceptible cues. A simple nod, a long blink, a subtle shift of the eyes, or the clearing of a throat is often all it takes to command the group's actions. Third, you must observe the group's adoration. This is not necessarily romantic love, but a deep physical manifestation of deference and respect. You will see this when subordinates naturally walk half a step behind the leader, when they physically lower their posture to appear submissive in the leader's presence, or when they instinctively pause and look to the leader for silent approval before answering a question. Finally, you will witness the most profound indicator of influence: mimicry. Human beings biologically and subconsciously copy the physical postures and gestures of the people they respect and wish to please. If one person in a tense negotiation leans back, crosses their left leg over their right, and steeples their fingers, and 3 other people at the table subconsciously adopt that exact same posture moments later, you have just found the true center of gravity in that room. By identifying the leader, you can predict the actions of the entire group, neutralize their influence, or negotiate with the only person whose opinion actually matters. But what happens when the hierarchy you are observing is your own? What happens when the anomaly you spot is a trusted co-worker, a longtime acquaintance, or someone wearing the exact same uniform as you? This is the agonizing reality of the insider threat. Historically, some of the most devastating acts of violence, from workplace shootings to betrayals on the battlefield, are perpetrated by individuals who were implicitly trusted and granted unfettered access to the inner circle. We miss these threats because our brains are heavily biased toward trusting our own tribe. When a stranger on a subway platform exhibits intense, nervous, smuggling behavior, our limbic system screams at us to run. But when a colleague we have shared coffee with for 5 years exhibits that exact same severe, uncomfortable cluster, we desperately rationalize it away. We tell ourselves they're just having a bad week, going through a messy divorce, or buckling under a tough project. We allow our social conditioning and our emotional attachments to completely blind us to glaring behavioral red flags. To protect your inner circle, you must shatter this bias. You must accept that an attacker does not magically materialize on the day of the violence. A catastrophic internal attack is always preceded by a long escalating trail of pre-event indicators. The individual will begin to exhibit deep, sustained shifts into the uncomfortable cluster. Because they are actively harboring a malicious secret and planning a high-risk action, they will display intense nervous energy, pulling away from casual social interactions and executing quiet proxemic pushes to isolate themselves. They will begin testing the boundaries of the environment, asking highly unusual questions about security protocols, accessing information far outside their normal duties, or showing a sudden, intense interest in the specific schedules of other people. If you see these anomalies stacking up in someone you know, the rule of 3 still absolutely applies. You cannot afford to let the awkwardness of the situation prevent you from taking action. Your predetermined decisions in the workplace or your personal life must be to talk, report, and intervene. You must have the courage to break the comfortable silence, ask the hard questions, and alert the necessary authorities before the timeline reaches the bang. The path to mastering all of these skills, from reading the micro-expressions of a stranger to identifying the subtle shifts of an insider threat, is a lifelong journey of discipline. Do not expect to become a flawless, intuitive expert overnight. Think back to the very first time you sat behind the steering wheel of a car. Your conscious brain was completely overwhelmed. You had to actively think about the pressure on the gas pedal, the angle of the rear-view mirror, the speed of the passing traffic, and the position of your hands. It was clunky, exhausting, and terrifying. But after years of practice, driving became entirely automated. You can now navigate a complex high-speed highway in the pouring rain while casually sipping a coffee and listening to music. Your situational awareness will develop in the exact same way. In the beginning, you will have to force yourself to deliberately identify baselines, label the natural lines of drift, and intentionally search for behavioral clusters. It will feel mechanical and draining, but if you commit to this practice every single day, building your internal file folders in coffee shops, grocery stores, and airport terminals, the process will eventually become effortless. Your subconscious mind will take over the heavy lifting, allowing you to fluidly read the world with a quiet, powerful intuition. Walk forward with humility. Understand that human beings are infinitely complex, and that you will occasionally misread a situation, but never let the fear of being wrong stop you from trusting your instincts. You are no longer navigating the world asleep. You have chosen the harder, far more rewarding path of the protector. You have stepped out of the reactive shadows, taken control of the timeline, and committed yourself to living left of the event.